Half of young Canadian women say they're putting off kids because they can't afford them. But Mark Carney wants 100 million people, not for families, for the machine. No homes, no hope, and no future. Just growth at any cost. Not to build Canada, but to change it.
Hi, I'm Candice Malcolm, and welcome to the Candice Malcolm Show. So as you know, folks, I am deeply skeptical of the national polls. I think the national polling companies mostly work for the legacy media, the liberal media, and they are doing what they are supposed to do, which is create hope and optimism for the Liberals, prop up the Liberals, despite all of their scandals and the terrible job they've done running this country, and to try to demoralize Conservatives, to try to make sure that Conservatives stay at home, they don't believe that we actually have a shot of winning this campaign. And that is why at Juno News, we decided to commission our own polls during these elections so that we could see with our own eyes, see the data, see what is happening. And that includes asking different types of questions that the legacy media pollsters do not ask. And I'm very excited today to announce that we have a new poll that is just being released this morning, and it shows a very different story than the national polls. You're going to want to listen to this interview. I am pleased to be joined by David Murray, who is our in-house pollster here at Juno News. He works for a company called One Persuasion, which is one of the best polling companies in the country, and the work that he's doing is incredible in showing a totally different picture of the mood of the country right now. So David, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you.
Okay, so we have a new poll that has come out. Why don't you tell us sort of the top line, what it shows?
Sure. Top line for this nationally is Liberals at 39%, Conservatives at 36%, NDP at 14%, Bloc Québécois at 9%, and the Greens at 2%.
Okay, and how has that changed from the previous week?
So this actually results in a 4 percentage points drop for the Liberals, an increase of 3 for the Conservatives, and very notably, this is very significant, an increase of 3 for the New Democrats. And the changes that we're seeing are permeating throughout the different regionals and throughout the demographics. It's a very fascinating poll that's showing some real movement at this stage in the campaign.
Well, it's interesting because I had you on a few weeks ago and we talked about how the real story of the campaign at that point was the complete and utter collapse of the NDP. So there was a lot of mention in legacy media about how Canadians were flocking to Mark Carney and that everyone was sort of throwing their support behind him. Really, what we were seeing is that the NDP had just like the bottom had fallen out. Some projections showed them getting as little as 0 seats in this election. But I think this week what we saw was a little bit of a comeback from the NDP. So can you talk about maybe why that is? What were the reasons that show that the Liberals are now actually losing support on the left back to the New Democrats?
There's one demographic in particular that this is very pronounced in, and that's with females between the ages of 18 and 34. So among that demographic, we're seeing a 12 percentage point decrease for the Liberals. At the same time, we have a 16% increase for the NDP, as well as an 8% increase for the Conservatives at the same time. There's other stuff happening with the Bloc Québécois and Greens as well, but those are the main numbers that are very important. And I think that it's very interesting. If you look at the previous poll we did for Juno News, we actually asked about Mark Carney's scandals and the impact that they were having on people's impressions of him. And what we noticed was that among females between the ages of 18 and 34, it had by far the most negative impact on their vote. And so seeing this really turn out in the actual ballot decision is very interesting. It's also notable that this is actually more where traditionally this demographic is. In terms of raw vote numbers, we're looking at the NDP leading, this is for females between the ages of 18 and 34, NDP leading with 35%, Conservatives with 32%, and the Liberals with 21%.
That's really interesting. Okay, now this is the key part of the poll that we do differently at Juno News than any other polling company in the country. This is something that we came up with for this campaign. I know you said last time that it has been used in other countries, and it does help give us a better picture of what is happening. And that is something that we call the neighbor poll. So the neighbor poll, the idea behind this is we're not asking you, who are you voting for? The question isn't to the person who's responding to the poll. It isn't, hey, who do you plan to vote on in the next election, which it could lead to people not giving the straight answer or choosing not to answer, or what we see is it skews more towards the Liberals. But asking people who their neighbors are voting for, which I think kind of cuts past the distrust that many people have for pollsters, and you might be more open to telling a pollster who you think your neighbor is going to vote for based on the momentum, based on the number of signs in your neighborhood, based on the conversations that you're having at the coffee shop or around the dinner table or around the water cooler at work. And it helps us tap into something a little bit deeper. And this is why I think it's so important. This time around, this is the second time that we've asked this neighbor poll question. And this time around, we actually see that the Conservatives are winning when we look at it this way. When we look at it this way and ask this question of who your neighbors are voting for, the Conservatives are at 40%, the Liberals are at 38%. So David, why don't you walk us through this?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is with this neighbor poll, or with this neighbor question, it's actually the Conservatives that are leading over the Liberals. The Conservatives, 40% of people indicated that their neighbors would be voting for the Conservatives, 38% for the Liberals, and then 14% for the NDP, 4% for the Bloc Québécois, 3% for the Greens, and then 1% for other. And this is among people who did not say that they didn't know how their neighbors were voting.
Okay, and help us walk through the methodology and why we ask these questions, because you came up with 3 rationales and ideas as to why this is a better way of sampling the public.
Sure. So this is not a new methodology. This has been done in several countries, most notably the United States, France, and Germany. And they've all really found very different types of movement that are not typically characterized by ballot in and of itself. And academics and people that study polls and politics have come up with 3 core reasons as to why this is. Among social networks, they kind of function as mini electoral samples. If someone has 10 friends who plan to vote, that is effectively another mini sample of local sentiment summed up over many respondents. These mini samples can provide a robust signal. Number 2, openness about others' choices. People might be reluctant to say what their own individual ballot choices, but saying what you speculate your colleagues or your neighbors would be, that's a lot easier for people to do. And then thirdly, capturing undecideds in the late shift. So as networks discuss politics, respondents may report what they hear among their friends who are on the fence or leaning in a given direction before those same friends would admit it to a pollster.
And so this really helps us capture, when you just look kind of objectively at the different campaigns, right? You see Pierre Poilievre with these huge lineups, these huge events. 15,000 people in Edmonton. They kept having to change the venue because they needed bigger and bigger locations. And it wasn't just in Edmonton, in the sort of prairie conservative heartland. He's also having these huge showings in suburban Ontario, in places that have long been Liberal and even NDP strongholds. He had a big rally out Prince Edward Island, another one in Sault Ste. Marie. These are not places where Conservatives traditionally have huge levels of support, and yet people are going out in public and really kind of voting with their presence and showing that they are excited and that there's enthusiasm behind Pierre Poilievre. And I think this is the first time we're really starting to see that translate into the polls. Is that how you read it as well, David?
I think that we're clearly starting to see some more momentum getting behind Pierre Poilievre. This movement that we've seen in the national ballot, and even in regions such as Ontario, we see the race tightening quite significantly. So in Ontario, as an example, we have the Conservatives up 3 compared to our last poll, with the Liberals down by 4 and the NDP up by 1. These are numbers that are really manifesting that change that people are trying to look for among the electorate. And as people have more and more of these conversations, they start to learn more about the different policies and platforms that are being proposed by the different leaders, or some of the other more intangible things like leader qualities. This is all manifesting into how people are firming up their decision to vote. And we've seen in the past that Pierre has been able to get significant numbers of people to his rallies, and they become more and more and more impressive as time goes on. So to your point, whether it's in Borden, Carleton, Prince Edward Island, or Sault Ste. Marie, or even in Edmonton, it's absolutely incredible to see this kind of momentum. And I think you're really starting to see this show up in the numbers.
Interesting. Now, we talked earlier about young women and how young women have really shifted away from Liberals, mainly over their impression of Mark Carney, given all of these scandals that he keeps finding himself in. I mean, they're never ending. We now learn that the Chinese government is doing a coordinated campaign to promote Mark Carney in WeChat forums. So that really impacted the impression among young women. I want to talk a little bit about young men, Canadian men aged 18 to 34, because we also saw quite a bit of movement with the Liberals and losing ground among that demographic. So can you tell us a little bit about what you found with men aged 18 to 34?
For sure. So the changes and the movement is not as significant as females 18 to 34, but it's still quite substantial. So we see actually the Liberals lose 6 percentage points of their vote compared to last time. The Conservatives lose 1 percentage point compared to last time, and the NDP gaining 7 percentage points over last time. So the actual top line that this works out to is males 18 to 34. The Conservatives would get 37% of the vote, Liberals would get 29, and then the NDP would get 21. This is also relatively in line with what we've seen in previous, before the election cycle and even before the real rise of Mr. Poilievre's polling numbers. This is actually quite normal for ballot within this actual demographic.
And then let's talk about older Canadians and baby boomers. We talked a lot before about how the older demographic was showing up for the Liberals. Is that still what we're seeing?
It is, but we're starting to see some movement definitely in the other direction. So among males over the age of 55, no change in Conservative vote from last week, but the Liberals are down by 4 percentage points, which is actually quite significant. We actually see a lot of that movement translate over to the Bloc Québécois in Quebec, and among older females, like over the age of 55. So on ballot, they actually have 50% of the vote for the Liberals, 31% for Conservatives, and 5% for the NDP. That's actually the movement that we're seeing is a loss of 4 percentage points from the Liberals, a loss of 3 percentage points from the New Democrats, a gain of 3 percentage points for the Conservatives, and among the Bloc Québécois, it's a gain of 2 percentage points. So very interesting trends overall that we're seeing in this right now.
Okay, and now I want to talk a little bit about regions, because one of the things that our polls have been finding that other polls haven't really picked up on is a surge in vote behind the Bloc Québécois and the idea that the Bloc could provide as the spoiler for the Liberals in Quebec. So is that still a trend that we are noticing in these polls?
It is. So our top line in Quebec is the Bloc Québécois at 35%, Liberals at 30%, Conservatives at 22%, and the NDP at 8%. So in terms of the delta or the change from last time, the Liberals would be down 5 percentage points, the Bloc Québécois would be down also 5 percentage points, and the Conservatives would be up by 4. Which is very interesting. And also combining this with the demographic data that we're seeing as well. It's older Québécois individuals are shifting their vote from the Liberals to the Bloc Québécois. And what's also very interesting is if we actually look at the neighbor poll results, one thing that really stuck out to me was the number of people who said they did not know how their neighbors were voting. And on average, that number in Canada was around 31%. Within Quebec, though, that number shoots up to 44%. So this shows, in my mind, a large amount of volatility that people are experiencing, that the idea of a firmness of vote really shaping up in that province specifically is not necessarily happening the way that others are seeing it. And people are recognizing it. People are recognizing that their neighbors, colleagues, and friends are mobile. They're not firm and stuck in their trench on a partisan basis.
That's super interesting. Okay, I want to talk about one last thing with you, David, while I have you. We have been doing a series here at Juno News called Swing Riding Profiles. We've highlighted the key ridings and profile them based on which ridings we think will determine the election. It's going to come down to a handful of swing ridings. It's going to be close, folks. As you can see, even with our neighbor poll, we have the Conservatives at 40, the Liberals at 38, neck and neck. And it's going to come down to a small handful of votes and a small handful of ridings. I want to talk about one that we just highlighted this week, which is Milton East and Halton Hills South. So you wrote that this is a sort of seat the Conservatives have to win in order to form government. It's also critical for the Liberals to hold if they expect to retain power. So I hope I'm not putting you on the spot too much here, David, but I'm hoping you can help us understand this riding of Milton East, Halton Hills. It's a suburban Toronto. I think it's considered suburban or exurban, just part of the GTA or just outside of it. And I'm hoping you can sort of walk us through why you think this is one of the most important ridings to watch in the election.
I think it's demographically very interesting to watch. I think you have a lot of young families in this riding specifically. It's also on the doorstep of many other GTA ridings. Like it's firmly within Halton region, which is on the doorstep of Mississauga and Peel. I think that you have very interesting ethnic communities in there as well. And sort of bridging that urban-rural divide, because when you have communities like Georgetown and other small ones on the fringe, you're getting out to shooting down towards like Kitchener area as an example of where this kind of is projecting, and out towards like Michael Chong's kind of fortress that he's built in the from the blue perspective. It's seen as a natural stepping point either way. If you're going into the GTA or coming out, it's kind of a very significant hurdle that both parties need to get over if they wish to actually make progress in the other ridings surrounding them.
Well, it's interesting because the idea is that Conservatives dominate in the rural parts of the country, and this is a pretty clear example of an area that used to be rural and now it's becoming sort of more immigrant dense and more of like a traditional Toronto suburb. So like how do you think that the changing demographics in this area hurt or help the Conservatives?
For the Conservatives, I think it certainly helps. When you talk about young families, you're thinking about specifically cost of living, you're thinking about housing, you're thinking about transportation, all things that Mr. Poilievre has had quite strong and robust policy on, and he's been very vocal about it for a very long time. In fact, his private member's bill is called Building Homes Not Bureaucracy Act, which is literally a piece of legislation designed to build more homes, to make it more affordable for our increasing population to be able to afford homes. And that's not just in the immigrant sense, that's also for our young people as well, because he's met countless 35-year-olds that are living in their parents' basement still. Like, this is something that we even saw during the leadership race that he was very, very passionate about, and really wanted to use the federal levers to be able to address some of these issues in a very systematic way. So I think that some of these demographics that we're seeing, especially in a riding like this, actually very much favors the Conservatives in terms of the issue set that they really care about.
Great. Well, so interesting. All right, David, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you joining the show.
You're welcome.
It's David Murray of One Persuasion. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Candice Malcolm. This is the Candice Malcolm Show. Thank you and God bless.